Some of these gadgets are new for me, so you'll have to bear with me. There we go. What a perfect evening. Isn't it a beautiful evening? And what a song. I tell you what, that song touches me every time I hear it. And I am so thankful that I know what I know. And I know my anchor holds, and my anchor is God. I'm grateful to be here speaking to you this evening. And God bless each and every one of you that came. Thank you, Pastor Chris, for having me and giving me this opportunity to share my story. Last night I was going over this and I got to thinking and I thought, now Karen, really, does someone want to hear your story? Really? Is this really, you really want to tell this story? And I was telling a friend that, and he said, Karen, that's nothing but the devil. Tell him to get under your feet, that you have a mouth and you have things to say. And I said, okay then. Well, just 19 months ago, I was in a horrific wreck. Took the life of my husband. Nearly took mine. They told my kids they didn't think I'd make it. But every day is a good day, and I am so thankful to be alive. You know, sometimes people say, I'm so glad to be alive, and they use it as a cliche, but I'm going to tell you something. I know what that means. And I'm glad to be alive. I know that in a blink of an eye, it can change. Things can be taken from you, and your dreams and things you thought were going to be aren't. But you know what? I mean it when I say I love life, and I do. I love life. Honestly, I can't wait to put my feet on the floor in the morning, and I can't wait to take my shoes off. If you see, they're already gone. I'm here today to tell my story because I want the people to know that God is real. And I want people to know what God has done for me. And I know He can do it for you. My story is big, but I'll tell you what, God's is so much bigger. God has healed me. He has healed my open wounds. He has touched me inside out, my heart, my body, and my soul. I have visible wounds on the outside, and I have those so deep that no one but God and I know what they are. People who know me and see me on the street taught me it. They'll stop me and they'll say, Karen, is that you? And I feel like Jesus showing doubting Thomas my scars so that they know, yes, it's really me. People are taken back that I'm still alive, that I'm living, that I have all my body parts, and they're still moving, and I'm still smiling. For you to understand me and see my journey, I must lay some groundwork so that you know who I am, where I came from, and how I got to where I am today. I was born in Iowa, Kansas, and raised in a little but mighty town of Yates Center, Kansas. And my parents, Milton and Alberta Stockerbrand, were hardworking Christian people. They were farmers, and my mom was a nurse at the Allen County Hospital. Well, Dad and Mom, they just taught us kids everything they knew. Jesus, hard work, Jesus, to be good people, and Jesus. I grew up with 6 siblings. My father grew up with 11 and my mother 8. So you see, I came from a very large family. And as a little girl, mornings in our home started with Bible study around the table and teaching. Have you ever been in the presence of someone who prayed and they just had a line straight to God? I mean, it was as if they just picked up that landline, said, hello, God, it's me. And God probably rolled his eyes at my father and said, yes, Milton, I hear you. Well, I'll tell you what, that was a good thing. And I'll tell you something else. You better have a sandwich, because once Daddy got on the phone with God, he was going to be there a while. Well, Dad and Mom took us kids to church every time the doors were open. They placed angels of protection around us all the time and those who worked on their farm. And Mom always said she had 6 theories on raising children. Then she had 6 children and no more theories. I describe myself as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed farmer's daughter. I was married to a wonderful man, my best friend. I love to fish, garden, shop, go antiquing, and visit my friends and family. Wayne and I had 2 children, a boy and a girl, Ashley and Brandon. And I had 2 stepdaughters, Tammy and Jennifer. I have 10 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. I'm just an ordinary person, just like y'all. And I even describe myself as simple. But my friends laugh at me and go, "You're anything but simple." Well, I was talking to an evangelist friend of mine one time, and I said, "You know, Marge, I don't pray like my dad, and I don't pray like my sisters. They can quote that Bible from front to back. And you know that they grab a hold of you, they can tell you exactly what chapter, verse, and book it was in and where it's going to come from and how it's going to happen." And I said, "I don't pray like that, Marge." And she said, "Well, Karen, how do you pray?" And I said, "Well, I just say, God, it's me. And I know you know what I'm about to ask you, so could you just go ahead and fix it for me? Please and thank you." And Sister Marge, she looked at me and she laughed. And I'm being serious. I'm needing help. And she goes, "Karen, you make God smile. Don't you think he knows the scriptures after all?" I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Well, Karen, he sees you as a breath of fresh air. So just keep talking to him." So I encourage each one of you, don't say you don't know how to pray. Just talk to God the Father. Goodness gracious, you could make him laugh just like I can. He's the one who made you. He made us all different, and we're all in his image. As I speak, I want you to know that I was once that little girl that sat in the back row of the classroom. I cowered down, and I didn't want the teacher to call on me because I didn't want to have to speak. And when I was called to go to the blackboard and write up there with chalk, my hand shook so bad I couldn't hardly get the chalk to write. I was very quiet and I was very shy. Well, baby, just look at me now. I credit my God and I credit my husband. Thank you for believing in me. Pulled me up off that back row. Told me I was important. Said, "Rise up off that back row, girl." Well, the military and law enforcement lifestyle Wayne and I lived forced me to be strong, independent, positive, and in all things grateful. You know, there was nothing like the comfort of sliding your hand into your daddy's hand and then into my husband's hand and looking up and thinking, wow, what a man. And I loved these mighty men. My dad was my hero. I loved him beyond measure. And I loved slipping my hand in his as we walked on the sidewalk to church. And I looked up at him and I thought, he's so strong and so handsome. And I would even fake being asleep when he'd take me home so he'd have to pick me up and carry me in the house. There's nothing like being wrapped up in your daddy's arms and feeling safe, is there? You all can remember that. The relationship I had with my dad and my husband was in the natural. But you know what it taught me? It taught me how to slide my hand into God the Father's and spiritual. Even how to climb up in his lap and find rest. Comfort, the strength to rebuild and recharge and to move forward. As a child, my dad had typhoid fever. He wasn't expected to live through that, but he had a praying mama, and she knew who her anchor was too. And he lived through that. And then as an adult, Dad had chronic acute asthma. And I remember one afternoon in particular, Dad's attack was horrible. I could see the air being sucked right out of him. He was sitting right there at the dining room table. And Mama had taken his t-shirt off as it was soaked in sweat. And that bothered his lungs. So she was drying him off with a towel. And I was called to help. And I had to hold his arms up so that it would open that airway and he could breathe. I remember him saying, Mom, I'm not going to make it. Mom, I'm not going to make it. And she said, oh, yes, you are. And I'll tell you what, you never told Mama no. Well, Mama had called the family doctor, and he arrived at the house to make the house call. And after Dad's spell settled down, I was no longer needed. So I left him to the doctors and Mom. And at this point, it was time for me to go to the pasture and bring in the milk cows. So I walked down the lane and through the pasture. And there was such a heaviness on my heart from what all I had witnessed, from what all I had seen, from the suffering I saw from my dad. I didn't know what to do. But I knew I didn't want Daddy to die. So I did what I was taught. Right out there in the middle of that pasture, I fell to my knees. And I spoke directly to God. Please don't let my daddy die. Please let him see me graduate from high school. He means so much to me. And while I'm at it, Lord, I just need to give you my heart. And so it was right there in that pasture when I planted my anchor, and I've never let go. You know what happened? My dad lived until I was 43. God gave him 30 years. And I am so thankful that God answered the prayer of that little girl who fell to her knees and called on the name of Jesus. I know that I know what I know, and I know my anchor holds. Thank God that I've been surrounded by godly praying people. Those people include each one of you. This church here had a praying clock 24/7 so that he could talk to Martha and find out where I was and how I was doing. You people were praying. My people back home were praying. Ooh, boy, God had his hand on me. And I know that those prayers you prayed will come back to you tenfold. Prayers work. Faith is real. The Bible is just not words in a book. It's living water. All one has to do is believe and proclaim it. You know, John 4:14 is where Jesus said, but whoever drinks the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. Now, you know that doesn't mean he's going to give you a glass of water and you're never going to want to drink water again, right? What does it mean? Well, it means that he is the water and you are the vessel, and he is pouring into you. He is pouring into you so that you receive grace and his spirit into you, the vessel, and you will be satisfied spiritually and filled. And you will have a wellspring of life within yourself, thus leading to eternal life. Look at us. As a young girl, I knew I did not want to marry a farmer. I had stepped in well, you get it. I did not want to marry a farmer. Growing up on the farm taught us accountability and responsibility and so forth. It was an honest and admirable way to grow up, and I'm glad I grew up that way. But I did not want to marry a farmer. That was hard work. And in 1981, I married my husband, Wayne, and we celebrated 43 wedding anniversaries. Wayne was a combat medic in the United States Army. I did not know what an Army's wife lifestyle was going to be, but it wasn't a farmer. And I was so in love. I married my soldier, and I learned a new life. And Wayne traveled and experienced duty stations all over the world. The kids and I traveled with him to all of his duty stations in the United States and one tour in Germany. In our military life, Wayne spent most of his time away from us. We once figured out in 22 years of military life that we had had about 8 years together. When you say that the military guy has a rough go, just remember the family does too. Only 1 year of that was consecutive, and that's when he was teaching the medical classes at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Wayne's deployments and trainings were near and far, and we were stationed in Texas at Fort Hood and Fort Sam Houston, then in Georgia at Fort Benning and Fort Gordon and Fort Stewart. He was deployed to Germany twice, Egypt and Korea, and he had multiple deployments to Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. He was in Desert Storm and Desert Shield. This photo was at Fort Stewart on the parade field when he returned home after Desert Storm. In 1999, Wayne retired from the United States Army with 22 years of military service. We moved back to Yates Center, Kansas, and I'm going to tell you, I came back screaming and kicking. I did not want to come back to Yates Center. We owned a home in Texas at Fort Sam Houston. We owned a home there, and we were living in Georgia, and I kind of liked Florida. I mean, look at all the beaches. And he said, I'm going to take you home. 22 years ago, I took you away. I'm going to take you back home. I want the children to grow up in a small town, and I want them to go to school there. I was like, no. He said, well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to tell you right now that Georgia and Florida are out. He said, we do own a home in Texas. I said, yeah, we do. It'd been on the market for 2 years. We've been trying to sell that thing. We were only renting it. He said, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to pray about that. 2 days later, I got the call. The house sold, and we were moving to Yates Center, Kansas. So I became obedient. I think that's the word. Well, Wayne became a Kansas Highway Patrolman, and he made history at the age of 50 to be the oldest person to graduate from the Kansas Highway Patrol Academy. He retired from there with 15 years of service. He then was elected Woodson County Sheriff and later elected County Commissioner of the position he held upon his death. I worked in education for 38 years as a substitute and a paraprofessional in the states of Georgia, Texas, and Kansas. My last 23 years of employment was with USD 366 in our hometown of Yates Center, Kansas, and I was employed as an instructor at the Alternative Learning Center. This supported the teachers and the students in many ways, and I worked directly under the principal. You know, I got the kickers, the fighters, the screamers, the cussers, the ones that didn't want to be at school. But I just loved up on them and sent them back to class. In all the years I worked in education, I never had the opportunity to become a certified teacher. 38 years, I'd not had that opportunity. And I was working in USD 366 at home, and one of the school teachers, she's sitting right there, she said, Karen, you don't need to be certified by the state. You've been anointed by Christ. You've been anointed by Christ to teach, and I loved every minute of it. Often we question ourselves, are we enough? Are you enough? Are you enough? Am I enough? Well, we were made in God the Father's image. Therefore, you are enough, and so am I. My life has been a whirlwind, and I'm thankful for being taught about Jesus. I'm grateful for the many giftings prayed over me. Healing in my hands, not the healing of my hands, but healing in my hands. And my prayer voice and immediate discernment. And as we learn more in Christ, we can reflect back and see time and time again when we just thought things happened. Things did not just happen, but they happened for a reason. And God was the reason. He was ahead all the time. For instance, before going to Germany, we were visiting in Kansas, and I was with my sister Yvonne, and she wanted to go see a pastor. So I said, okay. So we walked into his church, and this man had never seen me, ever. And he didn't say hello to Yvonne. He didn't ask who I was. He just looked at me, and he said, you have healing in your hands. Huh, okay. He said, can I pray over your hands? I said, of course. So he prayed over my hands, and I thought, well, okay, that's cool. Well, right after we got to Germany, got settled in a little bit, we had a playground right behind us, and it's where the military wives and their children would play back there, you know. And a lady started screaming, and she had a 1-month-old little baby, and he had quit breathing, and she didn't know what to do. There was at least a dozen of us mamas out there, and she threw him in my arms. And I thought, oh, Lord, have mercy. God knows. What am I going to do? So I did what I was taught to do. I opened that baby's airway, laid him out, and I just laid my hand on him and started praying. And he coughed, and he breathed. That was not the first time there was one evening not long after that, a couple weeks after that, that my husband and I were going to bed, and he looked at me funny. He goes, "Aren't you putting your pajamas on?" I said, "No, not tonight." I said, "I'm not going to put on my pajamas tonight." He goes, "What's the matter?" I said, "I'm not sure, but I can't put those pajamas on tonight." He's like, "Oh, okay." We had hardly laid down when the front door, there was a banging on it like you thought the door was going to come down, and it was the mama, Ernestina, and she had her baby, and her husband was with her, and he said he's quit breathing again. She lived on the top floor. She'd come down 5 flights. I thought, "Oh, good, Wayne's the medic." Whoop! That's not what happened. She threw him in my hands. I did the same thing, and I prayed with that baby, and that baby coughed and breathed. There was a third time, and she was leaving, and she needed someone to babysit the baby, and no one wanted to babysit the baby because he quit breathing. But I said, "Yes, sure, I'll do it." So I did. The baby quit breathing, and I had to call 911, and the baby lived. They took the baby to the hospital and kept him for over a week. They couldn't find anything wrong with him. And not again did he have another attack. She came to me, and she goes, "Karen, what did you do? I know you did something." I said, "You saw everything I did." I said, "I didn't do anything but lay my hand on him. God did it. God healed your baby." Here's another, for instance. When we lived at Fort Stewart, we had housing areas on the base, and it was Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and we were Echo, so we were kind of at the end. Well, the lady next to me, she was the mayor of our group of Echo, and if we had problems, we had a meeting once a month, and we'd tell the company, the general, what was going on. So she said, "I can't make it to the meeting," but she said, "We have a bus issue. Our kids, there's not enough room on that bus for our kids to get on it, and there's cigarette butts and trash down there, and we need it cleaned up, and I've been telling them, and nothing's happening," and I'm thinking, "Okay, well, I'll do it." So I got me a piece of paper, and I went down there, and I counted how many children got on that bus and how many didn't have a seat, and I counted how many cigarette butts and all the other trash that was down there, and I didn't pick it up. I just left it there. And the next morning, I got up and I did the same thing. And that afternoon, I had to go to the base and go to the meeting. Okay, so I took my little folder with me, looking like I was all official and everything. And I walked in, and as I walked in, there was this guy, and he was in like a jumpsuit. And I thought, well, he's a nice-looking janitor. And he opened the door, and he said, "How are you today?" I said, "I am finer than frog hair." And I walked on, and I thought, well, that's the silliest thing, Karen. Why did you say that? But, oh, well, it was already out. There I was, so I went on. Well, we got to the meeting place, and there was like a horseshoe table at the front, and that janitor was sitting right up there. I thought, well, he called the meeting to order. Interesting. And he said, "Okay, we need to find out what's going on." He goes, "We'll do this just like we always do. Alpha, who's your representative? Stand up, tell us what's going on in your housing area." And after she did, she sat down, and he said, "No, stop. We're not going to do this as usual." He said, "This morning I was back there, and I held the door open for a woman that's sitting right there." I thought, oh, Lord. He said, and she said she was finer than frog hair. I thought, oh, man. Well, you know what? He said, "I'm going to hear from her next." So I told him what the situation was, and he said, "Can I have your folder?" He was the general. Was I going to tell him no? "You can have it." And I thought, I wish I'd have had a copy. Well, anyways, I gave it to him. And that evening, when I went down to get the children from school, the MPs were down there. They had the whole area cleaned up, and they were taking notes of how many kids got off that bus. And the next morning, we had a second bus. See there? God was there before I could get there. Grandparents and parents know that prayers of protection are pertinent. I know I'm alive today due to the power of prayer. Prayers never go void. Have you ever thought about that? Those prayers you pray, they go on forever and ever. They're over your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and that to come. The favor and blessing of the family is still being honored. Prayers are important. Think big about what you pray, and pray in earnest. And sometimes we have not because we ask not. September 4, 2023, my life changed. Everything about my world changed. Wayne and I had to have been unconscious out there at that wreck site. Oh, let me see if I missed something. For a period of time. And as I came to, I was trying to make sense of my surroundings and figure out where I was and where was the schoolhouse, because we were going out there to see the schoolhouse. Well, this is when Wayne reached over and he touched my leg and he said, "Mom, I love you." And I touched his hand and I said, "I love you too." And I turned and looked at him and I knew something horrific had happened. And as I looked out the front glass, I knew we had been in a wreck. And I could hear my mother's voice. I could hear her in my head, my mom being a nurse and all. And she said, "Stay calm, do not move." So I sat still. I had no pain. I didn't even know I was hurt. Wayne spoke of no pain. Our hands were still held. I later realized that we were in shock. And I don't know how, I did not know I was hurt. But here I was on my right side, so battered and broken but I didn't know it. That was God. I'd been ripped open. I didn't feel it. That was God. EMS was then at my door. They were asking me questions and telling me their assessment, asking me for my cell phone so they could contact my son, Brandon. He was a police officer, you know. Him and his wife had just been to the house. We had just had dinner together. They had given us a little package, and in that little package was a fishing lure. I thought, woohoo, but there's only one lure. Who's going to get it, him or me? Well, on that lure it said, "Your new little fishing buddy is going to be here in April." That was their way of telling us that we were going to have a baby. So we all had dinner together, and we had birthday cake because Wayne's birthday was the next day. And the boys sat on the floor. They were tying fishing knots, and they were talking about the little one coming along fishing knots with them too. So when we went out there, we were having happy conversation and happy thoughts before all this happened. The helicopter was there for Wayne. I knew from being married to a highway patrolman that the chopper would take the one that was hurt the most, so I knew that he was going to go in that chopper. I was loaded into the ambulance. A KHP officer came to me. He had a tear on his cheek, and he said, "I talked to your son, and I've told him all that's happened here, and he instructed me to tell you the truth." He said, "Don't lie to my mama." So he told me that Wayne didn't make it. Isn't that just like Wayne? He was stepping out of the way so I could have that helicopter ride. He was quite a man. But I couldn't get strapped into the helicopter because of all my injuries. They couldn't take me off the litter board. So they put me back into the ambulance. I don't remember the ambulance ride to Stormont Vale and Topeka. I do not remember the kids or my family members being there. I do not remember anything for several days. I was told I talked. Imagine that. But I don't remember. My son and my daughter, Ashley and Brandon, along with their spouses, were beside me the whole way, right along with my siblings and my friends and my great friend, Margie. Let me tell you something. It was not necessary for my family to talk to me or for my friends to talk to me when they came to the hospital room. All they had to do was hold my hand. So if you ever think you don't have the words when you go to see someone that's sick, don't worry about the words. Just go. When they would take my hand and hold my hand, it was like being hooked up to a battery cable. It filled me and made me feel so much better. It's what gave me strength and courage. Me laying in that hospital bed, that was the first day after the wreck. But my daughter sent me that picture after I had returned home, and I had never seen it. And I blew it up on my phone, and I looked at my face, and I just sat in the kitchen floor. And I called her, and I said, tell me about this picture. And she said, well, Mama, this was the first day after the wreck. I said, Ashley, I look dead. And she said, Mama, you are so beautiful. I had already lost my daddy, and I was afraid you weren't going to be there. She said, you are so beautiful, Mom. And my son was there beside me. This was that morning, and Ashley had to go home and tell her children that Papa had died and that Gammy was really sick. The second photo, 18 days later. Look at that. 18 days later. That's God. I have a friend who, when he sees that picture, he said, that's a Jesus smile. You have to know, when I was in that bed over there, I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't lift my hand. I couldn't comb my hair. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't do any of it. My children did it for me. But I didn't lay on that bed by myself. If you look real close, you're going to see that I was wrapped in God the Father's arms. I told a friend of mine, God was healing me before I could even ask for it. And my friend replied, God was healing all of us before we could see, feel, or know our hurts. Again, God is always ahead. Isn't she beautiful? Not me, my daughter. There was so much those first days I do not remember. I don't remember visitors coming in and having conversations, and I don't remember doctors, nurses, or the sequence of events. But I do remember going down for my 5th surgery. I was scheduled to have surgery at 7 a.m., but my port was not working. So the nurses worked on it most of the day. And later the port was just taken out because it wasn't usable. I was taken down to surgery at 6:30 that night. My daughter and my son was with me, and we were in this little pre-op cubicle with the nurse, and she was just the sweetest little thing. And she called down to the anesthesiologist department to talk to the anesthesiologist, and when they got off the phone, my son goes, well, that man's a little on the grumpy side. And she looked at us, and she goes, yes, he was. So she left and took a walk. Well, you know what? It was 7 o'clock, and there was a shift change. We'd waited all day. Who was in charge? God. So when she came back, she brought the anesthesiologist, and not only him, but there were 2 people with him. And I thought, well, you don't usually have a team, but okay. And they were so nice, and they just walked into the room, and the whole atmosphere changed in that room. It was so calm, and it was peaceful. And the anesthesiologist told me the whole procedure, and that he would be with me the whole time. And he then asked if I had any questions. And I said, yes, I do. Imagine that. I said, what is your name? He said, my name's Anthony. I said, well, Anthony, where are you from? He said, Nigeria. I said, well, what brought you to Topeka, Kansas? He replied, you did. I was sent here to be here for you at this appointed time, for this appointed task, in this appointed place. I was appointed to be with you during this operation. And I thought to myself, ooh, those are godly words. Well, Anthony and his team took me into surgery. Now, how often does your anesthesiologist wheel your hospital bed down into surgery? Does that happen? No. He told me, I will not leave your side, and he didn't. Anthony and his team pushed me down into surgery Well, we walked into those, well, he walked, but I rolled into those surgery room. There was some music playing, and it was that rap music, you know, that stuff, and I was like, ooh. I said, Anthony, I don't really care for that music. And he said, well, I don't either. He said, I kind of like Elvis. And I went, what? I said, I like Elvis too. And he said, and the next thing I knew, I heard Love Me Tender play. I knew it was from Wayne, and it was from God. And I felt so loved. And I went to sleep, and that anesthesiologist was still standing by my side. Well, after surgery, Anthony came into the recovery room, and he said, Karen? I said, yes. He said, you're going to be okay. He said, everything went well. And I said, okay, that's good. He said, Karen, I'm going to see you again. And I thought, oh, goody, I like Anthony. And Anthony then, he looked at me and he said, Karen, you will know my face and you will call me by name. And I will know your face and you will call me by name. And I thought, oh, great, Anthony's going to come to my room and check on me. And that night, Anthony didn't come to my room. And as I was laying on the bed, I told God, I said, Anthony didn't come today. And God said to me, it isn't today for you to see him again, but you will one day, and you will call one another by name. And I said, oh, I know that I know what I know, and I know my anchor holds. And I know Anthony was an angel straight from heaven. He was there for me at my appointed time, for that appointed task, at that appointed moment. And I can't wait to call him by name. My body on the right side was severely battered, bruised, crushed, and ripped. As I was the passenger in the truck, my arm and all went out that window. We had the windows down. It was a nice day. And I figured my arm was just like the middle of a wash machine. My wounds were a broken clavicle, a sternum. My shoulder was crushed. They said it looked like oatmeal. They didn't know what they were going to attach anything to. My right forearm was crushed and open. It had over 5 breaks. It was put together with 4 plates and over 30 screws. There was my first surgery. The bottom side had a gaping ripped hole that couldn't be stitched together. That's right there. It had to have a felt product put in there so the vessels could grow up through it before they could ever skin graft it. It was a miracle, but this wound never had an infection. All my ribs on the right side of me was broke. My right knee was not broke, but the flesh was torn. I had a Morel Lavelle lesion. Okay, so that is from my hip down to my knee, from here to here. And what happens is like football players have it too. It's when the flesh and the fat and the meat, like a brisket, is ripped apart. And it doesn't heal back together. And it filled up with fluid. And my leg became so long, it looked so big, it looked like a tree trunk all the way down to my foot. And I remember asking, am I ever going to have a knee again? They told the kids it was very apt that that leg would turn black and rot and fall off. But it didn't. I also had an internal degloving. Now that's a weird thing. So this leg, although the inside was all ripped like that, the skin was apart from the meat, and you could stick your hand between the skin and my body like a butterball turkey. The doctor told the kids that she could reach her hand all the way up to my hip and all the way around. That's why they thought it would not adhere. My knee also had a tunneling. There was a spot in it that wouldn't heal. There's my arm. The bones on my right foot were broke. My left foot, big toe, was almost ripped off. I just had surgery on it about 4 months ago. There's my shoulder. There's my knee, and you can see that the hole in my knee that tunneled that would never heal. It went all the way up into my leg. It was 168 days before that thing healed. The other is my left foot. The slash on the top is what caused my toe surgery. After every surgery, I asked, "Where is Wayne?" And the kids would have to tell me, "Daddy died." They had to relive it. And that hurts a mama's heart. But you know what I never forgot? I never forgot my husband telling me that he loved me and me getting to tell him that. I was in the hospital just short of 2 weeks, then transferred to Wichita where I was admitted to Waterfront Rehab Facility, and I was there just short of 4 weeks. I then transferred out and went to my son's home for in-home care, and I was there for 45 days. His wife was instrumental in setting up my care. Although occupational therapy and physical therapy came to the home 1 to 2 times a week, it was my daughter and my son and his wife who did most of my wound care, bandaging, and my leg massages. It would take them 2 hours to redress me morning and night. That's not counting the medications and the appointments. And then there was always the trips to the 3 different doctors. I don't know how they did their job. Well, my son didn't. For 35 days, he didn't go to work. He stayed with me. I remember one time, my son, he's a big old boy. He's like 6'5" and 230, 240. He's a Wichita policeman, you know, one of them tough guys. Well, anyways, to keep this leg alive, they had to do a massage on it, a deep tissue massage, and they would rub it and massage it, and I'll tell you what, when Brandon got a hold of you, you knew it. And I remember laying in the recliner one day, and he was doing that massage, and tears were just rolling down my face. And I just could hardly stand it. And I said, "Brandon, you're so strong." I didn't want to tell him he was hurting me. I said, "You are so strong." And he stopped, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, "Mama, do you want to get better, or do you want me to stop?" And I said, "Keep going, I like it." Thank God for my children pressing me forward even when it was hard. You know that when that was hurting me, how it had to have hurt him. Through it all, I had one minor infection. The accident was September 4th, and I returned to Yates Center November 22nd in 80 days. Remember, they already had me dead. They thought I was going to lose my leg. They thought I was going to lose my arm. They didn't know what all was going to happen, but God did. I know that I know what I know, and I know my anchor holds. Even upon returning home, infection was still a major concern. My leg wound would not heal. The dressing still had to be changed 1 to 2 times a day. I had physical therapy 2 times a week and wound care 2 times a week. I didn't have time to lay on that bed and cry. I had to get up and go. The doctor's prognosis, I would very, very likely lose my leg, but God's plan was healing. The God's prognosis was that I would lose my hand, but God's was healing. The doctor's prognosis that due to the trauma and the joint that they had to put into my arm, my shoulder, that I wouldn't be able to raise it over my waist. God's was healing. It's not quite as strong as it should be, and my leg's a little wonky, but I was a little wonky to start with. I have people who say to me, "I hate to tell you about my ache or pain because it's nothing compared to yours." And I told God, I said, I don't know how to answer that. So I have an answer. You know what? My wound might have been bigger. I may have lost my husband. You may have lost your dog. But pain is pain. I don't care if it's a hangnail. You ever have a hangnail? Those things hurt. Hurt is hurt. I've had those who have experienced loss talk to me, and after years, they're still in this deep, dark hole. They're so sad. And they look at me and they say, "How do you smile?" You've been through hell. You've walked through the fire. I tell them, it's just Jesus. I've had family and friends say, Karen, how are you able to move on in such a positive manner? How can you smile? You know, I had to ponder that. I thought, okay, I have friends who've lost their husbands. I have friends who've had major losses. I have friends who've gone through things and they're just sad and they're in this deep hole. And I don't understand it, God. I said, God, you got to paint me a picture. So I was talking on the phone to a friend of mine, and in the middle of our conversation about, I don't know, the garden or something, I said, I got it. I've got it. I've got it. I've got it. Okay? So think of this. Think of it like pie. You have this nice bottom crust of your pie. That's your foundation, okay? It's like you know there's a God. You know there's a God. That's foundation. And then you have this top crust, and it's so pretty, and it's got some little sugar and got some little designs and stuff on it, you know? And that's just newness in Christ. Well, all that's really good. So let me tell you this. You ever gone to Walmart to the bakery? You go back there and there's those little square boxes that are about 4 inches and they got pies in them and they have about every flavor. Well, one time I was back there and I thought, I'm going to buy me a pie. I mean, this is a fact. So I looked through the pies and I thought, well, which flavor should I get? And so I picked a peach pie. Now, peach wasn't my favorite, but it was Wayne's favorite, but he wasn't going to get any because I was going to eat it before I got home. But I picked a peach pie, and he loved peaches, although I told him he had to come to Kansas to find a true peach. But the crust was beautiful and appealing and alluring, and the bottom crust, and I couldn't wait to get out to the car and get checked out and get out there and get all settled in and open that pie up and take a bite and sink my teeth into that pie. Well, you know what happened? That pretty crust. I sunk my teeth into that pie, and there wasn't anything but a little goo in the middle. There wasn't any more to it. God showed me this is how people are sometimes. There's a solid foundation and there's a pretty little crust, but the newness, the middle, is just a sticky mess. The pudding in the middle is missing, which is actually the Holy Spirit for us, and that's what makes life so yummy. The yummy spirit in the middle is what gives you drive and encouragement and love and hope beyond measure. It's what puts that smile on your face and a skip in your step, even when it's hard. Do you have pudding in your pie? Yes. Numerous times I've been asked, aren't you mad at God? I can't be mad at God. Look at all my blessings. Aren't you mad that Wayne died? I am so sad. He just got to heaven first. Aren't you mad at the man that hit you? Hate gets you nowhere. You know when you're driving down the road and you're keeping it between the lines. I learned the other day that's called the mustard and the mayonnaise. The yellow line and the white line. I just learned that. Well, you're trying to keep it between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and you start hitting the speed bumps because you're looking in the rearview mirror of where you've been. Well, what happens? You get all in a mess. But when you take your eyes out of that rearview mirror of what's back here and look in the front windshield of what's out there, oh, the places you can go. Do I miss Wayne? Yes. Do I wish the accident hadn't happened? Oh, yes. Do I wish I had my old life back? Yeah. That my arm worked right? Well, and my leg wasn't wonky? I have life. And I thank God, and I thank my children, and I thank my family and my friends. And I can't wait to get up in the morning and put my feet on the floor. I have a hard time going to sleep at night because I wonder, did I do everything I was supposed to do today? You know, when I first got home, they told me, Karen, you have to rest. You have to shut your door. Put a note on the door and say, I'm sleeping right now. Come back. I couldn't do it. I could not do it. And people would say, why don't you do that? Well, I think sometimes I fell asleep when I had company. I said, I can't, because I feel like God brought every single person to that door. And I didn't know if they needed me or I needed them. But I didn't have the heart to shut that door. Do I cry? Oh, yeah, I cry a lot. But I thank God for grief. Isn't it wonderful? You have had a feeling that is so big that you can grieve. It's a good thing. You know, tears for me are like a safety valve on a hot water tank. It allows a release, and then it allows a reset. God can heal you inside and out. One only has to ask. My family has lifted me up and loved me beyond measure. Physicians on earth have been extremely instrumental in my care and my reconstruction. But God's the mighty physician, and His Holy Spirit can heal your heart and your soul, and that brokenness inside that no one but you and He knows. God knows your desires, your needs, your struggles, your battles. God knows them all. Just call on Him. And when you don't know what to say, just say Jesus. A whole swarm of angels will come to your side. Look around you. What's not to smile about? I was at Walmart one day, and I was bent over looking for something on the bottom shelf, and I heard someone say, "Hey, Karen, is that you?" And I thought, oh, Lord, they know my face and my derriere. Anyways, this lady was from Yates Center. Actually, she lived across the street from me. And she just hugged me. And I looked at her, and her eyes were full of tears. And I said, "Leslie, what can I do?" What? She goes, "I just have to tell you that you and Wayne saved my life." And I said, "Tell me more." And she said, "Well, I was on my way to Iola, and I was going to pass this truck." She said, and I'd followed it forever. And she said, "I don't even like to pass on the highway, but I thought I'm never going to get to where I'm going." And she said, so I finally thought, okay, I can see for miles. There's no one coming. I'm going to pull over, and I'm going to go around. And she said, as soon as I got into that other lane, the guy in the truck waved me back. She said, I didn't know why, but I obeyed. And she said, at that moment, a combine turned left. She said, that would have been me. She said, I saw my life flash before my eyes. And she said, I saw you and Wayne. And she said, I don't know why he had to die so that I could live today. But it's because of him. I said, you know what? I'm glad you're alive. God doesn't plan for bad things to happen, but He can surely make good from it. September 5th, the day after the accident. This picture tells a lot of stories. Wayne's old boss, the highway patrolman captain, he told me, Karen, he said, I tried to make sense of that wreck. He said, I studied the graft. He said, there wasn't anything y'all could have done. All the training Wayne had had could not have helped him avoid that wreck. He said there was nothing. It was a blindsided hit. And he said, you know, I'd worked with Wayne, and we'd worked scenes like this, and we'd made notifications, and we'd done all kinds of things together. And he said, you know what really bothered me was that I had never asked my brother if he knew who Jesus was. And he said, I was awake till 4 o'clock that morning, and I was wrestling with myself. He said, because I knew I couldn't turn the clock back, and I couldn't talk to him. He said, I thought he was okay, but I didn't know. He said, so I said, God, you're going to have to give me a sign. And he said, at 4 a.m., I went to sleep. That next morning, he went out his front door, and that is what he saw, a double rainbow. And he fell to his knees, and his wife came to him, and she said, Byron, what's wrong? And he said, there's nothing wrong. Look at that rainbow. He said, I'd asked God to give me a sign, and God told me, the first rainbow is to let you know I have your brother. And the second one is to let you know today's his birthday and we're having a party. Now, you would think that that picture came from his home, but it didn't. That came from my twin brother. And he saw that double rainbow. And he said the same thing. And I had a coworker who said when they got out of their car at school that day, they saw the double rainbow, and they said, "That's Wayne." That's our little fishing buddy. He arrived in April, and his name is Wayne, and he has on his papa's hat. Isn't he cute? He's just as cute from the other side. Last September 4th, marking the 1-year anniversary of our wreck, I went out to the crash site, and it's marked by this beautiful cross, and it was made by a student of mine. Her and her family put it out there. As I pondered the last year and all that had happened, I took a photo at that spot and sent it to my kids. It's kind of strange, though, even though I'd taken that picture on your phone and you see it immediately, you don't always see it. And later, as I got to looking at it, I thought, what do you see? Well, I see the cross with Wayne's name on it, and I see a tear in my eye. But behind me, there's a shadow of a man. It's not just a man. It's a soldier at the foot of the cross. And I feel that in this photo, God again is telling me, Wayne is the soldier at the cross, and he's kneeled there on my behalf to keep me covered. I was asked, why? Why do you speak? You've been through hell. You've walked through the fire. You relive the events every time you tell your story. And I replied, I relive the events even if I don't tell my story. I relive the events all day long, every day when I wake up and the pillow next to me is empty. And when I put Aquaphor on my scars, and when I put my support socks on, and when I walk down the stairs in the morning to face the day, and my husband's not there to whistle at me and wiggle his eyebrows. When the grass needs mowed and the strawberries and the blackberries need picked. And I'd get in his shed and use his tools. You see, I miss him and I miss us. I miss it with every breath I take. But God turns all those things to good. So I look at that and I smile. And I'm glad for those tools, and I'm glad for those berries, and I'm glad for that grass I get to mow. Wow. So through the tears, you know what I see is joy and love. And as I had it all, and it was great, it is still great. And I want others to know how to smile through the pain and embrace the new tomorrow because He lives. And He is God. And I can face tomorrow and I can smile because I know that I know what I know. And I know my anchor holds. Wayne and I talked about death and dying. His career had him in harm's way all the time. And in the Army, he had secret clearance. He went to places and saw things that he could never share with me. Even out of the Army for 20 years, I asked him one time, "Babe, can you tell me some of the places you've been and some of the things you have seen?" No, I can't. Desert Storm was a short war, but it had casualties, and he's seen many of them. So we talked about death. We talked about our death, and we both agreed the other had to keep living. He told me once, "I hope I die before you because you'll do it so much better." I thought, oh, I don't think so. He said, "You have so much life to live, and you are what saved me." And I said, "Oh, baby, I didn't save you. I just loved you. God saved you." I'd like to think that Wayne and I brought out the best in one another, and we became so closely knit, it was like seeing one person, not two. And I encourage you to have those hard conversations about what if tomorrow never comes, and what you want for one another. Be verbal. It is those conversations that make going forward easier. I hear Wayne say, "Keep living, Mom. I know you can do this. I'm proud of you, Mom, and give them hell." And I hated it when he called me Mom. Did your husbands ever call you Mom? I hated that. I tell you what, I was getting ready for school one morning. I was upstairs. He was already downstairs, but I was upstairs getting all roughed up and everything, you know. And I had this podcast on, and it said, "This is for you moms, for you women whose husbands call you mom." And I thought, woohoo, that's me. So I turned it up. And you know what it said? When your husband calls you mom, that is the highest rank he can give you. He has exalted you. I thought, ooh, baby, I'm exalted. So I finished getting duded up and all but slid down that banister that morning. And I went out there to that kitchen and I hugged his neck. And he looked at me and I said, "Good morning." And he said, "Good morning, Mom." And I said, "I just love it when you call me that." And he looked at me like I'd flipped my gourd. I know that I know what I know. And I know my anchor holds. And I know that God is good. And we carry hurts and scars and sickness and disappointments and struggles and trials. Don't fall in a deep, dark hole. Celebrate life. Celebrate God and all He has done and is doing for you. If you need Jesus, ask Him in your heart. If you need healing, ask for it. If you don't know what to say, just call on Jesus. As I stated in the beginning, my story is big, but God's is so much bigger. I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I hope you were encouraged. I hope that some of you have realized you need to let go of some things. What I'd like to do is just spend a little time in prayer to give you that opportunity to release whatever you've been holding on to God. And we'll be a couple of us standing up here if you want somebody to pray over you. But if you don't, that's fine. I know that's hard sometimes to come to the front. But let it go. Remember what Karen said. We all have hurts and we all have scars, but God heals those from the inside out. And God gives us joy in the midst of our physical infirmities. So I want everybody tonight to just release that so that you can experience a life like Karen's living. So let's take some time and pray, and anybody who'd like to come forward, we would love to pray for you.